streaming. Okay, we're streaming. We're live. Let's do this. All right. Tonight is Torah portion ETCHANAN. ETCHANAN. Anytime you see the CH together, you got to get the phlegm in the back of your throat, or else it doesn't sound right. ETCHANAN.
ETCHANAN.
Is this
Yeah,
it?
ETCHANAN.
That's the southern
Love
version.
it. That's a southern Torah portion.
We're from southern Israel.
All right, let's do a little recap. Southern Israel. Oh my gosh, the live this is just starting off great. For the
Sorry, honey.
I love it. All right, recap. What we talked about last week. Last week we talked about moving beyond the foundation and pressing on towards maturity. We saw where he was recapping their journey to where Yah told them, hey, you've been on this mountain long enough. It's time. Now we move on. We talked about the need for the Holy Spirit and testing to prove maturity. We looked at how transformation comes through immersion in the Word. And then finally it's just kind of ended with a recap of their journey, where they came, how they came through the wilderness to get where they are today. So today we're going to jump right in to Deuteronomy Chapter 3. And again, this is going to be a continuation of Moses teaching this new generation, this next generation, the things basically that the old generation did wrong that landed them where they're at. So he's like pleading with them, saying, please don't do like the last people did. Let's get this right. Let's get this right. Well, yeah, we know how the story ends. So, all right. So we're starting in verse 23. Is where we left off last week. I pleaded with Adonai at that time, saying, O Lord Adonai, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do deeds as mighty acts like yours? Please let me cross over and see the good land across the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. So he's really like, I know I messed up. Well, please, maybe I just have one more chance. Can I get? Maybe you'll let me in. But Adonai was angry with me because of you, so he would not listen to me. Enough, Adonai said to me. Do not speak to me anymore about this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah, look around to the west and the north and the south and the east, and see with your eyes, for you will not cross over this Jordan. But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will cross over before this people, and he will enable them to inherit the land that you will see. So we stayed in the valley opposite Beth Peor. And that wraps up chapter 3 where we left off. Any questions on that so far?
I have a thought.
Mm-hmm.
You know that really popular Christian meme that it's like there's nothing that you can do to mess up God's will for your life. Yes, there is.
There's too many. I feel like there's too many examples in Scripture that would say otherwise.
Yep. Right, because like right here you see that there was forgiveness.
Yeah.
It still didn't get to go.
Correct.
He forgave him, you just didn't give him the benefit of what.
You know, it's kind of like when your kid comes and says they're sorry, and you're like, forgive me, but you still don't get the fun.
Well, I think the other side of that too is I think we also have to understand the difference between what we think God's will is for our life, what God's will is for our life, and what God's ultimate purpose could have been for our life. I think there's a difference there. Because obviously, so if you look at that in a technical matter, yes, we can't really mess up the plan. Because God knows the plan before the plan happens, and He knows the end of the plan. You know what I'm saying? So He knows what the plan, but we can absolutely mess up our greatest potential.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's where like wording gets a little hairy when people say stuff like that. We can't mess up.
Well,
I mean, you're kind of right, but at the same time, you're not right.
you can absolutely make decisions and send yourself straight to hell.
Yep.
Like it's just, and it's more like where you can make decisions that keep you from being entrusted with more and getting to do the thing. So I just think that our free will plays a lot more into that.
Absolutely.
That's just what I was thinking about when reading that.
Yep. And we're gonna talk about this whole idea of Moses and the people and what happened as it comes into later on in the portion as well. So we'll bring that back up. Deuteronomy 4. Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and ordinances that I am teaching you to do, so that you may live and go in and possess the land that Adonai, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You must not add to the word that I am commanding you, or take away from it, in order to keep the mitzvot, the commands of Adonai your God that I am commanding you. Your eyes have seen what Adonai did at Baal Peor, for Adonai your God has destroyed from among you everyone who followed Baal Peor. But you who held tight to Adonai your God are alive today, all of you. See, just as Adonai my God commanded me, I have taught you statutes, ordinances to do in the land that you are about to enter to possess. So, when I was preparing and studying this week for this portion, there's so many little details, but like we talked about, this is really a big recap of what's already happened. And I'm reading through it, and there wasn't really anything that was really standing out to me specifically. And so I was actually on a run the other day, and I was like, all right, what am I supposed to take out of this, God? Like, what am I supposed to get out of this? And he said, this week, make the connection between what they're getting ready to do and spiritually what we're getting ready to do. And so that's what they're on the brink of entering the promised land. Like, they're getting ready to go into the thing that God has promised them. Well, spiritually, we're on the brink. Like, we are closer now to Yeshua's return and us getting to spend eternity with Yah than we've ever been. So we're on the brink of the promised land. The closer we get to either the Lord coming back or us passing, we're on the brink. We're on the edge of that. So how can we put this into kind of our situation, what's going on? And so we see here that first verse, so that you may live and go in and possess the land. Listen to the statutes and ordinances that I'm teaching you. But Moses is teaching them all these commands, all the statutes and the ordinances that Yah has given him. And what's the purpose of that? So they may, one, live, so they may go in, and so they may possess the land. So we put that into us. If we're going to live the life God has called us to live, if we're going to get to those promises and get to possess them, then we have to do the same. We have to obey the things that God's told us to obey. We have to look at that, learn it, so we can do that. You must keep and do them, for it is your wisdom and understanding in the eyes of the people, who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has God so near to them, as Adonai our God is whenever we call on him? What great nation is there that has statutes and ordinances that are righteous, like all of this Torah that I am setting before you today? I always find this interesting, because in our modern society, most people look at the Torah and the commandments as burdensome things, as things they want to try to do away with. Like, why do we have to do this? But here he said, in that day, it was an honor, it was a privilege, and it set them and elevated them above the other nations, that their God would be so gracious as to give them the commands. And if you think about the time period we're talking about here, most other nations had many gods who were far off. Their gods didn't come visit them; they're not there. That's like in the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. He jokes, but he says, "Hey, why don't you yell a little louder? Maybe that your gods will hear you." Because that's the way the other nations were. So when people try to say, hey, that stuff's done away with, that stuff's no good, that stuff's burdensome, it's not. It's a privilege that other nations would see and say, wow, look what their God has done. Only be watchful and watch over your soul closely, so you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, and they slip from your heart all the days of your life. You are to make them known to your children and to your children's children. The day that you stood before Adonai your God in Horeb, Adonai said to me, gather the people to me, and I will make them hear my words, so that they learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and so they teach their children. You came near and stood at the bottom of the mountain while the mountain was blazing with fire up to the heart of the heavens, darkness, cloud, and fog. Adonai spoke to you from the midst of the fire, the sound of the words you heard, but a form you did not see, only a voice. He declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to do, the 10 words, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. Adonai commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and ordinances, so that you may do them in the land you are crossing over to possess. So be very watchful over your souls, since you saw no form on the day that Adonai spoke to you in Horeb, out of the midst of the fire, so that you do not act corruptly and make for yourselves a graven image in the likeness of any figure, the form of a male or female, the form of any animal that is on the earth, the form of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the form of anything that creeps on the ground, the form of any fish that is in the water under the earth. And so you do not lift up your eyes toward the heavens and see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the heavenly hosts, and are drawn away and bow down and worship them. Adonai your God has allotted them to all the peoples under the heavens. But you Adonai has taken, and he brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people for his own inheritance, as you are this day. Furthermore, Adonai was angry with me because of your words, and he swore that it would not cross over the Jordan or enter the good land that Adonai your God is giving you for an inheritance. Again, he's bringing up this, Adonai got mad because of your words. Why would Adonai get mad at Moses for the words of the children of Israel?
It looks like it's blame shifting.
Possibly. Keep that in mind, we're going to keep going. For I must die in this land. I am not crossing over the Jordan, but you will cross over and take possession of that good land. Watch yourselves so that you do not forget the covenant of Adonai your God, which he cut with you, and make for yourselves a graven image in the form of anything that Adonai your God has forbidden you. For Adonai your God is a consuming fire, a jealous God. When you father children and children's children, and have been in the land a long time, and you act corruptly, and make a graven image in the form of anything, and do evil in the sight of Adonai your God, provoking him to anger. So it's interesting. He's said this multiple times now. Watch for yourselves. Be careful. He's telling them these things. The problem is, he's saying, look, if you forget these things once you're in the land, then you will then again release the turmoil. You're going to release the anger of Adonai. You're going to provoke him. And see, some people get stuck in trouble and turmoil because if Yah rescued them, they would forget him and walk away. I've seen that in my own life. You know, you get to places where you're like, oh my gosh, why am I having to go through something again? Why is this? Because once you get into that good place, do you remember Yah? Do you remember Yah in the good days just as much as you remember Yah on the bad days? There is nothing that will keep you focused on Yah more than adversity. When you go through hard times, what's the first thing you do? You go pray. I'm going to go pray. I'm going to talk. God, I need help. When you're dealing with things, that's the first thing you do. Well, what about in the good days? You know, when you wake up, nothing's wrong, everything's going peachy, is the first thing you think about is to talk to Yah. No. So, maturity is proven. We talked about maturity last week. Maturity is proven by how we act in the good times. When nothing is going wrong, when nobody's sick, when all your bills are paid, the bank account's full, everything's good, do you still remember Yah? That's when the maturity is proven. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will certainly be carried off quickly from the land you are crossing over the Jordan to possess. You will not prolong your days on it, for you will certainly be destroyed. Adonai will scatter you among the peoples, and you will be left few in number among the nations where Adonai will drive you. There you will serve man-made gods of wood and stone, which do not see or hear or eat or smell. But from there you will seek Adonai your God, and you will find him, when you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. When you are in distress and all these things have come on you, in the latter days you will return to Adonai your God and listen to his voice. For Adonai your God is merciful God. He will not abandon you or destroy you, or forget the covenant with your fathers that he swore to them. Indeed, ask now about the former days that were before you, from the day that God created man on the earth, and ask from one end of the sky to the other, has there ever been such a great thing as this, or has anything like it been heard? Has a people ever heard the voice of God speaking from the midst of the fire, as you have heard and lived? Or has any God ever tried to come to take for himself a nation from within a nation, by trials, by signs and wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great terrors like all that Adonai your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? So he's laying out all these things that show why God is the mightiest. Why the God that they are serving is the greatest. You were shown so that you might know that Adonai is God. There is no other besides him. From the heavens he made you hear his voice to instruct you, and on earth he caused you to see his great fire. You heard his word from the midst of the fire. Because he loved your fathers, he chose their descendants after them. Then he brought you out of Egypt with his presence by his great power, to drive out from before you the nations greater and mightier than you, to bring you in to give you their land for an inheritance, as it is this day. So you will know today and take to heart that Adonai, he is God. In the heavens above and on the earth below, there is no other. You must keep his statutes and his commands, which I am commanding you today, so that it may go well with you and with your children after you, so that you may prolong your days in the land that Adonai your God is giving you for all time. Then Moses set apart 3 cities beyond the Jordan toward the east. There the manslayer might flee, who kills his neighbor unintentionally and did not hate him previously. He may flee to one of these cities and lived. Bezer in the wilderness on the plateau of the Reubenites, Ramoth in the Gilead for the Gadites, and Golan in the Bashan for the Manassites. This is the Torah which Moses set before the children of Israel. These are the testimonies and the statutes and the ordinances which Moses spoke to the children of Israel when they came out from Egypt, beyond the Jordan in the valley opposite Beth-peor, in the land of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived at Heshbon, whom Moses and the children of Israel struck down when they came out of Egypt. They took possession of his land and the land of Og, king of the Bashan, the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan toward the east. From Aror, which is on the edge of the Wadi Arnon, as far as Mount Sion, which is Hermon, and all of the Arabah beyond the Jordan eastward, as far as the sea of the Arabah, under the slopes of Pisgah. Any questions on chapter 4? Do what?
Pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah. All right, let's get into Deuteronomy chapter 5.
Wait, how many are we doing?
It's through like 7.5. Half
Wow.
of 7. Moses called to all of Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the ordinances that I am speaking in your hearing today. Learn them and make sure to do them. Don't just get it here. Get it here. Adonai, our God, cut a covenant with us in Horeb. Not with our fathers, as has Adonai cut this covenant, but with us, all of us alive here today. Adonai spoke with you face to face on the mountain from the midst of the fire. I was standing between Adonai and you at that time to tell you the word of Adonai, because you were afraid because of the fire and did not go up the mountain. I am Adonai your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. So now he's starting to recap the 10 words, the 10 commandments. You shall have no other gods besides me. Do not make for yourself a graven image, no image of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. Do not bow down to them or worship them. For I, Adonai your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers on the children, and on the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments, or mitzvah. So, I thought about this, and so it says, where's that? Visiting the iniquities of the fathers of the children, the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. This was written 4,000 years ago, right? He says, but showing loving kindness to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Anybody want to take a guess at how long 1,000 generations is?
1 year.
So according to, I think it's David, who in Psalms he classifies a generation as 100 years. So 1,000 generations is 10,000 years.
1 0.
It's 10,000 years. So either God lied, or this is still applicable today because He said it.
That's good.
Right? When I saw that, I was like, wait a second. 1,000 generations? We haven't been through 1,000 generations yet. 1,000 generations hasn't happened.
I'm done.
So this is still applicable today based on His words in Deuteronomy.
We got about 5,000 or 6,000 years.
Yeah. You must not take the name of Adonai your God in vain, for Adonai will not leave unpunished anyone who takes His name in vain. Observe Yom Shabbat, or the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, as Adonai your God commanded you. 6 days you are to labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Shabbat to Adonai your God. In it you are not to do any work, not you or your sons or your daughters, or your slave, or your maid, or your ox, or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the outsider within your gates, so that your slave and your maid may rest as you do. You must remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore Adonai your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. And I want to back up because I forgot something. Okay, I want to back up real quick because I meant to do this and I forgot. Earlier I was talking about how does this apply to us? Because they're on the brink of a promised land. We're on the brink of a promised land. How does this apply to us? So he says, you shall not have any other gods besides me. Do we do that?
Yes.
Yes.
I was thinking about this, as soon as you get the idea in your head, you're like, I'm doing pretty good with these commandments. God goes, no you're not. What is having another God? Anything that exalts itself above Yah becomes a God. So anything you prioritize over Yah becomes a God.
Like media.
Media, anything. You can look, like, whatever your focus gets on, if it becomes stronger in your life than Yah, it becomes a God. Do not make for yourself a graven image. Do we do this? If so, how do we do this?
So, for the purpose of worshiping, that's what makes it a graven image. I'm not trying to split hairs, but like some really beautiful artists who have made birds and people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When it talks about the animals of the
Right, but it's not an idol. It's just because it's craftsmanship. So I was just wondering.
What about the cross and the little fish and stuff like that?
That's where it gets. I think that's where it gets in a little gray area. It's like, oh, where are we supposed to do this? And because he even says, he's like, don't bow down to them or worship them. He says it, yes, but then he says, don't even look up at the stars, for fear that you might it might lead you to worship that. So I think there definitely is a gray area. There's like, should we have big crosses out in front of our churches? Should we have? I don't know that we should, because of this. But let's go to a spiritual level. How can we apply this to a spiritual level? How about portraying an image of God that's not who God is?
Oh boy.
Focusing so much on God's love and grace that we forget about His justice. Just a thought.
Or teaching a Jesus that is teaching a Jesus that doesn't teach what Yeshua taught in Scripture.
Is that, could that be a spiritual graven image? Something that's not who God really is. Taking the Lord's name in vain. We talked about this. I mean, Abby taught about this. That when it says taking the Lord's name in vain, it's this idea of a marriage. Like when you get married and the wife takes the husband's name. Do we take Yah's name and then misuse it and mistreat it? Take it in vain.
Represent it.
The way you represent it, yeah. And then we get to the Sabbath. So obviously we know that there is the weekly Sabbath, the physical aspect of that. But what does the Sabbath represent?
Placing your trust in Yah and by not working, that He is the provider.
Rest.
Yeah,
Rest equals rest, right? So the greatest part of them going into the promised land was once they got in there. So it's interesting. I mean, we could break this down for hours. But there was 3 parts we talked about just a minute ago that were when you obey the commandments, it helps you live. It helps you go into the promised land, but it also said to possess the promised land. So there's 2 aspects of the promised land. There's going into it, and there's possessing it. Right? So the great thing about the promised land was that once they got into it, and the enemies were defeated, it was to give them a season of rest. So that once they possessed it, they got rest, right? I don't know about y'all, but even when I rest on Shabbat, I don't feel like it's like the end rest. Like I still have, there's still life the next day. So really, this idea of Shabbat can land into the promised land. So once we get into our promised land, we get to rest. And I was actually reading, I didn't put it in my notes, I'll pull it up real quick. I was actually reading today, pull it up, Hebrews chapter 4. And I thought this was so good. Oh, the Bible app updated. What is that? Looks funny. Pull this up real quick. Hebrews chapter 4. And the heading of Hebrews chapter 4 is make every effort to enter God's rest. Let us fear then, though a promise of entering His rest is left open, some of you would seem to have fallen short. For we also have had good news proclaimed to us, just as they did, but the word they heard did not help them, because they were not unified with those who listened in faith. For we who have trusted are entering into that rest. It is just as God said, so in my wrath I swore, they shall never enter my rest. Even though His works were finished since the foundations of the world, for somewhere He had spoken about the 7th day, the Sabbath, in this way, and God rested on the 7th day from all His works. And again in this passage, they shall never enter my rest. So then it remains for some to enter into it. Yet those who formerly had good news proclaimed to them did not enter because of disobedience. Again, God appoints a certain day today, saying through David, after so long a time, just as it has been said before, today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts. For if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken of another day later on. So there remains a Shabbat rest for the people of God. So we have an eternal Sabbath that is to come. Such a great hope to look forward to, that we will get that rest. Then verse 16, honor your father and your mother, just as Adonai your God has commanded you, so that your days may be long and it may go well with you in the land Adonai your God is giving to you. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's wife, nor desire your neighbor's house, his field, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. These words Adonai spoke to all your assembly on the mountain from the midst of the fire, the cloud, and the fog. With a great voice, He added no more. He wrote them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. As soon as you heard His voice from the midst of the darkness, while the mountain was blazing with fire, you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders. Then you said, Adonai, our God, has just shown us His glory and greatness, and we have heard His voice from the midst of the fire. This day we have seen that God speaks with man, and yet He keeps on living. Now then, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear the voice of Adonai our God any more, then we will die. For who is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living God, speaking from the midst of the fire as we have, and live? You go near and hear all that Adonai our God says. Then you tell us what Adonai our God tells you, and we will hear it and do it. So, we talked about this before. Again, it's a recap. God wanted to speak to all of Israel, and all of Israel said, nope, we're good. Just talk to Moses, let Moses talk to us. Adonai heard the tone of your words when you spoke to me, and Adonai said to me, I have heard the tone of their words that this people has spoken to you. They have done well in all they have spoken. If only there was such a heart in them to fear me and keep all of my commandments always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. Go say to them, return to your tents, but as for you, stand here by me, and I will tell you the whole commandment, both the statutes and the ordinances that you are to teach them, and they will do them in the land that I am giving them to possess. So you must take care to do as Adonai your God has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. You are to walk in all the way that Adonai your God has commanded you, so that you may live and it may be well with you, and you may prolong your days in the land that you will possess. Any questions on chapter 5? So I just thought of this. This literally just came to me as I was reading this. When we were reading, we've read this many times, we were reading before, in Ezekiel and Jeremiah, when they give the prophecy of the Holy Spirit coming and writing the Torah on their heart, and that they will walk in the statutes. I believe it's in Jeremiah, he continues to go on and say, then it will come a day when each one will know me, and they will not have to learn from their brother. Right? That's what God wanted from the beginning. He was trying to talk to all of them. He didn't want Moses to have to teach them all. So anyways, I just made that connection. I thought it'd be interesting.
That is interesting.
From the beginning, that was his plan. That each man would have the Holy Spirit in their heart, teaching them the Torah. They'd hear directly from the voice. What is the voice of God? What is the breath of God? That is the Ruach. That is the Holy Spirit. So each one would hear directly from the voice of God and would not have to learn from his brother. It's all from the beginning. That's the purpose from the beginning. Alright, Deuteronomy Chapter 6. Now we're cruising through this. This is good. Plenty of talk time after. Alright. Reader. Somebody want to read? Oh.
Now this is the commandment, the statutes and ordinances that Adonai your God commanded to teach you to do in the land you are crossing over to possess, so that you might fear Adonai your God, to keep all his statutes and mitzvot that I am commanding you and your son's son, all the days of your life, and so that you may prolong your days. Hear therefore, O Israel, and take care to do this, so that it may go well with you, and you may increase mightily, as Adonai, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love Adonai your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words which I am commanding you today are to be on your heart. You are to teach them diligently to your children, and speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. Bind them as a sign on your hand. They are to be as frontlets between your eyes. And write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
So this is commonly known as the Shema. If you ever heard me talking about the Shema, this is what I'm talking about. This is something that's quoted in the Hebrew culture and the Jewish culture all the time. But I love it because I love this because when the Pharisees try to trap Yeshua and ask him what was the greatest commandment, he didn't even quote one of the commandments. He quoted from the Shema. They said, what's the greatest commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Quoted directly from the Shema. Love it.
Now when Adonai your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of all good things that you did not fill, and cisterns dug that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant, and you eat and you are full, then watch yourselves so that you do not forget Adonai, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of slavery. You must fear Adonai your God and serve him and swear by his name.
Here's another here's another reason we know we haven't entered the promised land yet. Does anybody have a house that they didn't build? Any vineyards that you didn't plant? Like, I don't know. I would love to see that.
No, but I do have a house provided for.
Yes.
I have baby tasted it.
Yes.
You must not go after other gods, the gods of the peoples around you. For Adonai your God in the midst of you is a jealous God. Otherwise the anger of Adonai your God will be kindled against you, and he will wipe you from the face of the earth. You are not to test Adonai your God as you tested him at Massah. Diligently keep the mitzvah of Adonai your God and his testimonies and his statutes that he has commanded you. You are to do what is right and good in the sight of Adonai, so that it may go well with you, and you may go in and possess the good land that Adonai swore to your fathers. To drive out all your enemies from before you, as Adonai has spoken. When your son asks you in time to come, saying, what are the testimonies and the statutes and the ordinances that Adonai our God commanded you? Then you are to tell your son, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Adonai brought us out from Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes Adonai showed signs and wonders and great and terrible on Egypt, on Pharaoh, and on all his house. And then he brought us out from there so that he might bring us in to give us the land that he swore to our fathers. And Adonai commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear Adonai our God for our good always, to keep us alive, as is the case this day. It will be righteousness to us if we take care to do all this commandment before Adonai our God, just as he has commanded us. Seems like we just got a built-in definition of righteousness in that chapter.
I was just thinking that.
I mean, I have looked it up before, and it means one who obeys divine laws, but you got it right there.
Yeah. And it's funny, too, because a lot of times people will quote Philippians, where Paul talks about righteousness through faith. Except for, where does faith come from? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word. Last week we talked about that word, rhema. The root of that word roots right back to commandments. So,
Well,
there's your link. All right, last chapter, and it's only 9 verses of this, and we got plenty of time to hang out and talk. When Adonai your God brings you into the land that you're entering to possess and drives out many nations before you, the Hittite, the Girgashite, and the Amorite, the Canaanite, and the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than you, and Adonai your God gives them over to you, and you strike them down, then you are to utterly destroy them. You are to make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. You are not to intermarry with them. You are not to give your daughter to his son and take his daughter for your son. For he will turn your son away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of Adonai will be kindled against you, and he will swiftly destroy you. Instead, you are to deal with them like this. Tear down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their carved images with fire. For you are a holy people to Adonai your God. From all the peoples on the face of the earth, Adonai your God has chosen you to be his treasured people. It is not because you are more numerous than all the peoples that Adonai set his love on you and chose you, for you are the least of the peoples. Rather, because of his love for you and his keeping the oath he swore to your fathers, Adonai brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Know therefore that Adonai your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant kindness for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his mitzvah or commands, but repays those who hate him to their face, to annihilate them. He will not hesitate with him who hates him. He will repay him to his face. Therefore you are to keep the commandment, both the statutes and the ordinances, that I am commanding you today to do them. Any questions on chapter 7?
Wow, that was short.
That's not a whole chapter.
So really he's pointing out there that it's not so much that the Israelites were his favorite, but that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who did directly what he told them to do, is kind of why Israel was chosen.
It really goes back to Abraham, yeah.
Yeah.
It goes all the way back to Abraham. That Abraham found favor in God's eyes, and God made a covenant with Abraham. And the covenant he made with Abraham was that his descendants would become a mighty nation. That his descendants would be greater than the stars in the sky. And then he gets to Isaac, and he reestablishes this covenant with Isaac. Then he gets to Jacob, and that's when he says, "All right, Jacob, this is you, bud. Your family's going to be the one." All because of the promises that I made with Abraham and Isaac.
So hypothetically speaking, I believe we've talked about this in the past with like Jewish sages and whatnot. It's very possible that Yahweh asked other people to be set apart, and they said,
"Yeah, absolutely." I mean,
we don't
there
know.
could have been other. Who knows? When it gets down to it, who knows what all else was going on? You know, he could have been. He could have been roaming the earth, going, "All right, where's the set apart man I need? Where's the set apart man?" And it just happened to be Abraham. I mean, just like, for instance, why Noah? Why Noah? Because he was the one. He found a man.
yeah.
And it's just like then later on, when we see, the plea to save Lot. He says, if I could find 10 righteous men, will you save it? If I could just find one. He got him all the way down to one. If I could just find one righteous man, would you save it? It wasn't one man to be found. So he destroyed the city.
Right. So it's not that, God has it out for other nations and he's mad at them. It's just that they didn't keep
all
it
because of Abraham's faithfulness to Yah.
Me and Shannon were just talking about this on our walk. Like, why he...
Yeah.
We were toying around with all of those things.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then check. I like this too. And I may back up one. Instead, I thought this was crazy. Instead, you are to deal with them like this: tear down their altars, smash their pillars, cut down their Asherah poles, and burn their carved images. That doesn't sound like coexist to me. I'm just saying.
No.
Yah's never called us to coexist, and the reason the church is in the heat it's in today, the reason that the bride of Christ has gotten to the point it has now, is because they've tried to coexist. When Yah says, no, burn it down, get rid of it, destroy it, because it's going to draw you away, and that's what it's done.
I mean, you can look all throughout our church buildings and the beliefs and the things that they practice and see that
Yeah.
they've embraced them and tried to make them for Jesus.
Yep. Well, guys, that is Torah portion by ETCHANAN. ETCHANAN. Any other questions, comments, concerns, criticisms? Speak now, ever hold your peace. Well, good job, guys. That is it. Let me stop
Hey,
this.
how about I read that whole chapter and I didn't